Welcome to this Fiction Brain Masterclass on Flash fiction. The easy description is that Flash is simply a very short story. That description is technically accurate, yet it misses almost everything that matters. Flash fiction is a precise literary form with its own structural architecture. It has its own narrative physics. It has its own relationship between what appears on the page and what happens inside a reader's mind. It is not a traditional short story that has been aggressively trimmed. It is not a compressed novel. It stands as an independent genre that operates by rules shorter fiction cannot simply inherit from longer forms. Understanding Flash fiction means understanding what changes when narrative operates under extreme compression. It also means understanding what principles remain constant regardless of length. Today we will explore its history, its defining metric, the fundamental shift it demands, and the 5 primary mechanisms that make it work. Let's begin with where this form comes from. Flash fiction's roots stretch further back than most writers realize. Ancient forms like Aesop's fables were designed for rapid oral transmission. They embedded complete moral architecture within spare, efficient containers. The parable, the koan, and the riddle with its pointed answer are all ancestors of Flash. The form evolved through centuries of compression. It moved from the sketch to the vignette to the prose poem. It finally emerged in its current recognizable shape as a literary genre in the late 20th century. The digital age accelerated its rise. Online publications and literary journals created new audiences for ultra-compressed narrative. Today, Flash fiction appears alongside work of any length in prestigious venues. It is recognized not as a minor subgenre, but as a distinct form with its own demands and its own excellence. Now, let's look at what defines the boundary of this form. Word count defines Flash fiction's outer boundary. The industry standard places the threshold at 1,000 words. Anything below that mark, including microfiction under 100 words, qualifies as Flash. Within that broader category, stricter subgenres emerge. The drabble is exactly 100 words. The dribble is exactly 50. At the absolute extreme sits the 6-word story. Perhaps the most famous example is attributed to Hemingway. For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn. Whether or not he actually wrote those words, they demonstrate what the form achieves at its most compressed. That is complete narrative implication in just 6 words. These constraints are not limitations to work around. They are the conditions that make Flash possible. This brings us to the most important idea in the entire form. Standard writing instruction often treats Flash fiction as though the only difference from longer work is quantity. Cut everything unnecessary. Make every word count. These prescriptions are not wrong, but they are incomplete. They don't explain how narrative function changes when you compress a complete story arc into 300 to 1,000 words. Writers who apply these prescriptions without understanding the underlying shift produce Flash pieces that feel like abbreviated stories rather than complete experiences. The narrative machinery is the same, but scaled down. And scaled down machinery often doesn't run. Here is the key insight. Flash fiction operates on implication rather than exposition. What longer fiction can develop through scene sequence and gradual revelation, Flash must trigger through precise detail selection and strategic gaps. The reader does more constructive work. A novel shows, Flash implies, and the reader constructs. This is not lazy writing. It is leveraging cognitive completion, the reader's mind working to fill what the text leaves open. The craft skill is understanding which elements must be explicit and which can be inferred. It is creating the sensation of a narrative arc without space for full development. It is generating emotional impact through concentrated pressure rather than accumulated experience. So how does Flash actually accomplish this? 5 mechanisms define how Flash fiction achieves what longer fiction achieves through different means. Master these, and you have the architecture of the form. The first mechanism is implication architecture. Flash fiction builds narrative through what is unsaid as much as through what is explicit. Single details imply entire backstories. A faded tattoo, an expired prescription bottle, a child's drawing on aged paper. Character action reveals relationship dynamics without exposition. Who speaks first, who looks away, who touches whom and how. Environmental details establish entire worlds in a single sentence. Consider the difference between 2 approaches. The first tells us that a character had always been afraid of her father. The second shows her instinctively moving to the far side of the table when he enters. Her hand finds the chair back, knuckles white. The reader constructs the fear, its history, and its persistence. The writer never names it. The key is selecting details with maximum inferential payload. Each detail must carry more than it appears to carry. That is implication architecture at work. The second mechanism is temporal compression and the single scene window. Flash typically operates within one time frame or a narrow time window. Without space for scene sequence, narrative arc must emerge from change within one moment, or through strategic before and after juxtaposition. The present action occurs in one scene or continuous moment. The past is accessed through embedded reference. A memory is triggered by a present detail, or dialogue alludes to history. Change registers through comparison between the opening state and the closing state within that window. A flash piece about divorce might operate entirely during the signing of papers, but embedded details reveal the wedding, the fights, and the slow erosion. Present action is compressed into real-time scene. Backstory exists in illusion and triggered memory. The reader understands years of a marriage without being told about any of them. The third mechanism is load-bearing details. In longer fiction, individual details contribute to cumulative effect. In Flash, specific details must carry multiple functions simultaneously. They establish character, advance plot, create atmosphere, and embody theme, all at once. Consider this sentence. She kept her wedding ring in the same drawer as the expired passport and the dog's old collar. In 21 words, that sentence implies marriage status, a stalled life, travel abandoned, a dead pet, an emotional inability to let go, and paralysis as a defining state. One detail, 6 narrative functions. That is what load-bearing means in Flash. Every object, action, or description must serve more than one purpose. If a detail is only doing one job, it is consuming word count without earning it. The fourth mechanism is pressure point construction. Flash cannot build tension through extended sequence. Pressure must be inherent in the situation from the opening. Then it is concentrated through progression toward a single moment of maximum intensity or revelation. The opening establishes a situation already under pressure. Competing desires or unresolved tension exist from the first lines. The piece moves toward a single crisis point or moment of change. Pressure increases through revelation, escalation, or tightening focus. A strong Flash opening puts the reader under pressure before they have oriented themselves. The pharmacist is looking at her like he knows. That is immediate pressure. The piece moves toward what happens when he confirms her prescription is flagged. It builds through her internal panic and his careful questions. It reaches the moment she decides whether to lie or confess. The whole story exists in that compression. The fifth mechanism is resonant endings. Flash fiction endings rarely provide traditional resolution. Instead, they create resonance. A final image or moment reverberates against everything preceding it. This allows the reader to feel completion through echo rather than closure. The final image or line recontextualizes what came before. Endings stop rather than conclude, creating a lingering effect. Let's bring these ideas together. Flash fiction is not a smaller version of the short story. It is a form with its own physics. It builds through implication, not exposition. It compresses time into a single window. It loads each detail with multiple functions. It generates pressure from the very first line. And it ends with resonance instead of resolution. When you understand these 5 mechanisms, the constraints stop feeling like obstacles. They become the very source of the form's power. That is the architecture of Flash fiction.